Aloha, Hana. Today we're going to talk about using logic to make good decisions. And to help us with that, we're look at something called the quantitative reasoning process that you read about in the Math 108 textbook. And this is a way that we can look at how to use tools and to answer questions in a very rational method. It's important that first of all we understand the problem, we identify what the variables are. Variables are things that can change. Assumptions are things that don't change, but they're important to understand to help us make a decision. Then you can apply whatever quantitative tools you have. The more tools you have, that gives you the more tools you have, that gives you more options. And based off of that, you make an informed decision. And then you go back and you evaluate your reasoning. And looking at and helping us make decisions, we'll look at some logic today. Here are some propositions that we have. A proposition is a statement that's either true or false. You can test it, you can evaluate it, and it'll go one way or the other. Examples are bananas are fruit. Either bananas are fruit or they're not fruit. Laie is in Alaska. That's a proposition. It's a false one. Laie, as we know, is in Hawaii. Huma Huma Nuka Nuka Apua is Hawaii's state fish. And either the Huma Nuka Nuka Apua is a state fish or it's not. So that is a proposition. We can test that. Another one, it is raining. Because like the other statements, it's either true or false. It's something that we can evaluate. Things that are not propositions include things like questions and commands. Is it raining? That's a question. You can't really say true or false. That you say it is raining. You answer that with a proposition, but a question itself is not a proposition. All right, come back here. That's a command. Please make me a spam musubi. Like the other one, that's a command. That's not really true or false. They're not propositions. Propositions are something that you can test and you can evaluate to see if it's true or false. There's a quote by President Hinckley. He stated, "We declare without equivocation that God the Father and his Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, appeared in person to the boy Joseph Smith. Our whole strength rests on the validity of that vision. It either occurred or did not occur. If it did not, then this work is a fraud. If it did, then it's the most important and wonderful work under the heavens." So here we have a proposition that the first vision happened. It's either true or false. And then once you evaluate a proposition, then you can proceed and make a decision based off of that. So let's look at conditional statements. A conditional statement includes a proposition, and then there's a consequence that happens. And so, for example, a conditional statement could be, if it is Saturday, then you need to go to the beach. The assumption here that we make is, if it is Saturday, it's either Saturday or not. And then there's a conclusion, you need to go to the beach. So if it's not Saturday, you don't need to go to the beach. But if it is Saturday, you do need to go to the beach. That's what this conditional statement was telling us. And this is important because this is the kind of logic that we use in our if-then statements in Excel. So let's look at another one. If you do not plant papaya seeds in your garden, then you will not eat papaya. So with this statement, we have an assumption and we have a conclusion. The assumption is, if you do not plant papaya seeds in your garden, that's you either do that or not. The conclusion is then you will not eat papaya. If a person gains more knowledge and intelligence in this life through his diligence and obedience than another, he will have so much the advantage in the world to come. Maybe consider pausing this for a minute and identify the assumption, identify the conclusion. When you've done that, hit on pause, and then we can proceed from there. The assumption here is you're becoming the things that we learn in this life, and through our study, through our diligence, through our obedience, that's the assumption is that we'll gain more knowledge, and then the conclusion is you'll have more of advantage later on. This one comes from the wisdom of King Solomon. He had a bunch of tests, and one of those tests was if he could identify a flower among a whole bunch of false flowers. And so he used some logic to figure out through the wisdom of Solomon to identify which one was the true flower. And so the assumption, the conditional statement that King Solomon would have used to identify this, if there is a real flower, then a bee will fly to it. Go ahead and pause it, and then identify the assumption, identify the conclusion, and then hit play once you identify those. So the assumption is if there is a real flower, and then the conclusion is the bee will fly to it. So that's how King Solomon was able to identify which one of the true flower, even the artist, he created beautiful replicas. The story of the Old Testament. Here's another conditional statement, and this comes from President Nelson in the Friend around 2022. He stated, "You are a beloved child of God. Please remember that fact. If you never forget that one pure truth, you can face any problem with faith and courage." Go ahead and pause it, identify the assumption, identify the conclusion. So the assumption here is that if you never forget you're a beloved child of God. And then the conclusion here is you can face any problem with faith and courage. Doesn't mean we won't have problems. Doesn't mean it won't be hard, but we can have faith and courage to handle to be able to face all of our problems. So let's look at some conditional statements. Here's one. These are called implied conditional statements. It's not quite as explicit as the other ones, but that's still there. The conditional statement here is all snakes are reptiles. So the assumption here is if it's a snake, and then the conclusion is then it is a reptile. Here's another one. TUI will vote whenever there is an election. Go ahead and pause it, identify the assumption, and then the conclusion. So the assumption here is if there's an election, the conclusion is TUI will vote. Additional statement, all things were made by him. Go ahead and pause it, identify the assumption, the conclusion. When you've identified those, hit pause. If there's anything that was made, then it was made by him. Let's look at another one. She thinks about her trip to the beach whenever she hears that song. So the assumption here is if she hears that song, the conclusion is that she thinks about her trip to the beach. And we talk something about logic, and this one part of this can be a little bit tricky. It'll probably be this one, but it's really important, especially when you do analysis in the future. We're looking at the truth of conditional statements. Conditional statements are propositions, which means that they can either be true or false. We only conditional statement is only false when the assumption is true and the conclusion is false. And this might seem a little bit counterintuitive at first, but I think it does make sense as you think about it and as we use it and apply it in different things. The conditional statement is true when the assumption is true, the conclusion is true. Conditional statement is assumed to be true when the assumption is false. And because the assumption is false, there's no way to tell whether the conditional statement is true. So therefore, you want to give the benefit of the doubt and assume the conditional statement to be true. And I guess another way you can think about it is you just move on. You only get stuck when it's false. And so here's an example. If it is raining, then the street is wet. And so if we first of all evaluate the proposition, it's either raining or it's not. So if it is raining and the street is wet, okay, that can be true. If it is raining and the street is not wet, and then we'll throw the whole conditional statement out and say, okay, that whole statement is false because if it's raining, the street has to be wet. That's what the conditional statement tells us. What happens if it's not raining? If it's not raining, the street may or may not be wet. But we don't throw out the statement if it's wet or not. Because if it's not raining, the street can be wet because maybe a street cleaner went by, somebody dropped a bucket of water or something like that. So that doesn't mean the statement you can't throw out the whole statement based off of that. If it's not raining, the street is not wet. So if it's not raining, the street is dry. Well, yeah, that conditional statement is not incorrect because if it's not raining, nothing, then the street is dry. That doesn't mean the whole thing is false. So here's an example of one. If Teoda does well on her homework, then she will do well on the exam. When is this conditional statement false? Go ahead and pause it for a moment, identify this, and then when you're ready, hit play and we'll come back. So if Taylor gets 100% on her homework, she gets a C on her exam, then this conditional statement is false. If she doesn't do well on her homework, she might do well on the exam or she might not. Regardless of what she does on her homework or on the exam, if she didn't do well in her homework, that does not negate this conditional statement. Let's look at another one. If the home team loses this game, they will never make it to the championship game. When is this conditional statement false? Go ahead and pause that for a minute. And then when you're ready, come back. So if the home team loses this game and they still make it to the championship game, this whole statement is false. I mean, if they win this game, they may or may not make it to the championship game, and you don't throw out the statement if they win this game. Just if they lose this game and they make it to the championship game, then this conditional statement was not correct. So I guess if we were at class today, I'd invite you to invent a whimsical statement. It's kind of fun to hear. This might be something you could do with your roommates. Come up with a whimsical statement to share with the class. Conditional statement. Let's talk about some logical fallacies. These are arguments that are based in areas of reasoning, and by no means is what we have, the 4 ones that we identify here, a comprehensive list. But there's quite a few. But these are the ones we'll talk about in this class. Improper generalization. That's when you say that if it happens to one person, it must happen to everybody else. And so if you see something like, oh, there was an Alaskan and he was hot. He couldn't stand the temperature here. Therefore, if you make this idea that any Alaskan can't survive in Hawaii because it's too hot for them, that would be an improper generalization. An appeal to emotion, that's when you say something not based off of if you love me, you'll do this for me. It really may have very little bearing on what it is that you're saying. Or if you hate this person, you must do that. You're appealing to emotion to try to come up with a reason for something rather than what a rational approach to it. Personal attack, that would be like you're saying, oh, you're not smart enough, you can't do this. And which may or may not be true, but that's not the reason why you're attacking somebody's character rather than they coming up with a sound reason as to why that may or may not be true. Alternative explanation, if you have an explanation with nothing to do with why something happened, that's another example of a logical fallacy. We've got some examples of them. Here's one. In a proper generalization, here it said advertisement for a long time ago. It says 4 out of the top 5 movie stars use Luster Cream shampoo. Joan Collins uses Luster Cream lotion shampoo because it's a rich liquid in a mild form. And so this states that if somebody's a movie star, then they must use this particular brand of shampoo. And that it's an argument that concludes that because one individual or group experiences a certain result, then everybody else will therefore have similar results, which may or may not be true. And the fact that it's sometimes not true means that it can be a fallacy. Appeal to emotion. Here's something from World War II. Don't let the shadow touch them by war bones. It's an argument that claims that something is true because of an emotional reason unrelated to the argument. And so here you want to protect the children by buying war bones. Personal attack. There's a lobster and a shrimp or in some sort of election debate. Can we let a shrimp like this run our great country? Maybe, maybe not, but that's calling a personal attack fallacy is an argument that is based on attacking the person making the argument rather than critiquing the argument itself on the argument's own merits. Alternative explanation. It's when you have a conclusion made without completely considering all the reasons or explanations that might observe the observed effect. So here it says study, it said Weight Watchers watch time in car. Study shows mileage expands drivers' waistlines. So if you drive more miles, that means your waistline is going to get larger. Might be if you're not very active and you eat a lot more food, that might be a more better explanation as to why some waistline might improve, might or increase. Not necessarily, there might be a correlation, but there's not a causation here. And so you're giving some sort of alternative explanation. You're drawing conclusions when it's not and that's not what is causing the effect. Okay, so those are the four main logical fallacies that we have. If you have some time, this is really funny. There's this movie called Monty Python, The Search for the Holy Grail. It's British humor. It's just a little bit different than what you might be used to here in the United States. But if you watch this, it is replete of all sorts of logical fallacies. And it'd be kind of fun if you watch this little clip. And then if you probably keep a tally or identify what you'll see a lot of these, all four of these types of logical fallacies multiple times in this video.
I don't know either.
So let's play a little bit game. Name that fallacy. Identify the best answer for each of the type of logical flaws shown in the following arguments. The first one is Michelin because so much is riding on your tire. Here's a picture of a baby. Go ahead and pause it while you think about it, and then I'll tell you the answer.
How you doing?
So it's an appeal to emotion because we're looking at a baby. Of course, everybody loves babies. And so it's so much is riding on your tire because of your children. This next one, there's these two college kids, one's telling the other, yeah, well, I only failed my logic exam because I'm a Pisces and my professor's a Leo. Go ahead and identify which one and pause it until you identify the one. The alternative explanation. The way when people are born, the way the stars align, doesn't really have very much basis as to why somebody is successful in an exam, especially a logic exam. This next one, these two Canadian geese, we share many genetic characteristics with ducks because we evolved from the common ancestor. Their goose responds, you're closed-minded or stupid and you eat corn. You don't know anything. Let's go ahead and pause it, identify which logical fallacy it says. It's personal attack. This comes from Alma chapter 30, verse 16. You look forward to say that you see remission of your sins, but behold, that it's affecting the frenzied mind. Because of the animal side. Go ahead and pause it and identify the fallacies here. But this one, he does a really good job of incorporating two different fallacies at the same time. First of all, you have a personal attack. Saying somebody has a frenzied mind, that is an attack. And that's it. Alternative explanation that they're giving as opposed to why somebody with a relation of vaccines. It continues, this derangement of your minds comes because of the traditions of your fathers, which leads you away into a belief of things which are not seen. When pause it for a second, identify the fallacies. So here, Amosai has three different fallacies in here. Appeal to emotion, personal attack, alternative explanation. Her explanation is it's a tradition of your fathers. When actually truth is truth collaborating. But that was the explanation that he was getting. Personal attacks, derangements of minds. That's not a very kind way to talk to somebody. Appeal to emotion. Well, that he's talking about. Personal attacks can also appeal to emotions as well, as they do in this example. Here's another one. All doctors have bad handwriting. Which logical fallacy is this? Go ahead and pause it for a second. This improper generalization. I actually have a couple of brother-in-laws and cousins that are doctors, and they actually have really good handwriting. So anyway, there's this idea that doctors must have bad handwriting. You think all these film crews brought on global warming, or did global warming bring on all these film crews? Go ahead and pause it for a second and we'll look at it. So there's an alternative explanation. It's the film crews that they're correlated with the fact that there's global warming. Film crews in Antarctica, but really they're not the reason why there's global warming. Here's another one. Tracy is wrong. Use an example to show Tracy's wrong. The answer is she's a woman. Go ahead and take a moment and pause. Identify what the correct answer is. Okay, so there's two on this one. There's a personal attack. There's the idea and also improper generalization. And then I think we've got one more in here. Wishing you a cheerful treeful with a 3/1 of smoking pleasure, always milder, better tasting, cooler smoking. So go ahead and take a moment, identify which one of these, and then we'll look at it as a class. Appeal to emotion. Christmas time is usually the time when families get to spend a lot more time together. The Santa Claus is associated with Christmas time. And so there's this idea that you're trying to associate happiness and joy with smoking cigarettes with a particular brand. So there's an appeal to emotion there. Well, great. I hope that was useful, and please let me know if you have any questions about today's lecture.